Hi, this is Stephen Lee Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller. Welcome to the playlist on my channel entitled Reading List Rock, in which I look at the connections between the world's great rock music with literature, wider culture, the arts, what have you, to give you a deeper understanding and greater enjoyment of the wonderful genre of Eurocentric rock music and American rock music, all rock music. If it's got a cultural association, I'll cover it eventually. So Hawkwind are one of my favourite bands, and recently a lot of you watched my first video clip about Hawkwind, about Quark, Stages and Charm, and quite a few of you subscribed. Thank you very much for that, and thanks to the great support I've had from the Hawkwind fan community, because this channel is new, so I do need subscribers. So if you can subscribe, I can keep this sort of thing coming, and thanks for your comments, and please do let me know what you'd like to cover. Well, after the Quark video, I was chatting online with Joe Banks, and he said, that was good, Steve, I enjoyed that. What are you going to cover next? And he made some suggestions for things he thought I would cover. And one that he didn't mention was, of course, Astounding Sounds Amazing Music. And there's a little Japanese one there. I'm sure loads of you guys got that. Beautiful album of the Weimar Eagle there on the back. Wonderful, astounding sort of cover there, referencing the pulp magazines. Fantastic record. That was the first studio album I bought by Hawkwind, actually. I got a compilation first, and I bought that one. Marvellous stuff. I know Dave Brock doesn't like it, but a lot of us are fans, so we'll talk about that a bit later on. So I want to talk about Astounding, but specifically I want to talk about Steppenwolf, which I think is one of my favourite Hawkwind songs, and it's absolutely brilliant, and I loved it straight away, because when I first heard it, when I bought Astounding way back in the early 80s, I'd actually read the novel on which it's based, so I had an instant understanding and relationship with the track. And obviously musically it's absolutely brilliant, lyrically it's astonishing. I mean, to me, one of the finest rock and roll lyrics ever written. So I want to talk about that today. So for those of you who don't know, Steppenwolf is sort of a translation into song of various elements of a novel by Herman Hesse, who was a German writer who wrote this novel Steppenwolf back in, I think it's the 20s, I think it's 1922 or 27. Let me just have a look, because let's see. Translated in 1929, first published in 1927. So it's between the wars, and it's during the Weimar Republic. So the Weimar Eagle that we know and love from the back of Astounding is supremely relevant, and that's probably why it's there. So Steppenwolf is one of my favourite novels. I read it, as I say, before I got Astounding. I was probably, I think, how old was I? I was quite young when I read this. Yeah, early 80s. So this was really important to me, and I was one of those kids who spent a lot of time on their own in their bedroom, you know, lonely, alienated, what have you, and rock music was very much my thing, and so was literature. And Steppenwolf is the study of a middle-aged man who feels quite unwell. He lives in an attic apartment, and he has a small private income, and he just mooches around all day, and he's sunk in despondency. And he imagines himself as a lone wolf, a wolf of the steppes of the plains, a Steppenwolf. And he ventures out at night, and he occasionally keeps having what he thinks is an hallucination, a vision of a neon-lit venue called the Magic Theatre, which is labelled for madmen only, and it comes and goes. And what happens to the Steppenwolf is he encounters this young woman and a friend, and they reintroduce him to the joys of the sensual, to music, to pleasure, to life, to basically stop sort of moping around. And I very much related to the character in this, the Steppenwolf. Henry Haller is his name, as a youth. And it's a great blurb on the back of this old Penguin Modern Classic. It says, "This Faust-like and magical story of the humanization of a middle-aged misanthrope was described in the New York Times as a savage indictment of bourgeois society." And of course in the lyrics, Calvert says, "Fat bourgeois and his doppelganger are reflected in their solid glare." So, you know, there is a comment on that. So possibly Bob got that from, because this was the copy that he may well have had himself, or he may have had that blur, because it was a Penguin Modern Classic for a long time, still is. But the author himself says in this edition that Steppenwolf is a book which has been misinterpreted, and I very much related to the misanthropy, the dislike of humanity, love individuals, can't stand humanity, of Henry Haller, of the Steppenwolf. And apparently Hesse said that wasn't the point. The point was to rediscover the beauty of, as it says in the novel, Mozart and the stars, to rediscover the romantic beauty of the world that we live in while we're alive. And it was regarded by Hesse as a indictment of intellectual hypocrisy. The idea that if you're intellectual, you know, those sensual things don't matter, they don't matter at all, and they're not important. But the way that this affected me was that I sort of got both sides eventually. And, you know, as Howard Devoto, the lead singer of that great post-punk band Magazine, and who I recommend you listen to if you like the more sort of lush aspects of Hawkwind, said in a song, you have to take your pleasure seriously. And I'm a firm believer in that. So for me, Steppenwolf, the song, is a wonderful sort of conflation of those two things, the visceral, the sensual, and the intellectual. Because the intellectual is there in Bob's amazing lyrics, all the sort of metaphors and sort of verbal flourishes he employs. The cave of chromium that'll vacuum up my soul as I die is one of many parts in the lyrics that just leap out at you, and are just so beautifully written. Because Bob was a poet, and you know, and he was in a anti-tradition that had started in the mid-60s with people like Lou Reed, Jim Morrison, and was continuing in the 70s with people like Bowie, like Calvert himself, Patti Smith, people who really had an understanding of literature and really felt that it was no different to rock and roll. And of course Bob used to enact the role of Henry Haller, the Steppenwolf, on stage, and I'm sure a lot of you will have a copy of Back on the Streets. This is my Charisma original with a picture sleeve. I got that record fair many years ago, and that great picture that we all know and love from the Atom Inch tour. And there's Bob in the long frock coat and the top hat, sort of dressed like the Steppenwolf would have been in Weimar, Germany. So there we go. And I got another one here as well. This is the get the old Atom Henge version as well, which came out a few years ago, and that's a great one as well. So you've got to buy all these things, haven't you, really? So we love them all. So for me, Steppenwolf is the centre of the album, and that sort of riff that Dave knocks out that keeps on going, and Simon House is particularly great on the violin and the synth and the organ. And for me, one of my favourite parts musically is the very John Coltrane-ish riff that Nick Turner plays on the sax, the da 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 da. Apologies for the singing, but you know the bit I mean. And to me, it's one of the finest things, and I think it's after the second or third time that chorus sort of comes around, when Simon comes in with the violin and Bob starts speaking somberly, dressed as a man in the city, all that stuff. And the dichotomy between the man and the wolf, it's the sort of the aesthetic side of the man who's stepping back and the visceral, sensual, emotional side of the wolf. So those two things are perfectly melded, and that for me what makes great rock and roll. It's that combination of order and chaos, which sort of leads me to Michael Moorcock. We'll talk about order and chaos and Michael Moorcock when I look at Warrior on the Edge of Time, which is my favourite Hawkwind album. So I think that's all there. If you haven't read Steppenwolf, I would say do read it. It's an absolutely amazing novel. I would urge anybody who's young or anybody who's middle-aged to read it, because it has different meanings as you grow. As a youngster, if you're feeling disenfranchised, disenchanted, you relate to this. But it'll also say to you, get out there and enjoy life. Get to some Hawkwind gigs, you know, play some rock and roll. And, you know, don't just embrace the intellectual life, embrace the visceral life too. Get the balance between the two. And that was Hesse's thing. He wrote a lot of books. I'm a huge fan. I think I've read all his fiction. And in the early days, he was writing novels like The Prodigy and Peter Kamenzind, and they sort of had this theme that runs through all of them, which is all about what sort of life do you pursue? Do you pursue a life of contemplation and study, or do you get out there and experience life? And he used to sort of facilitate between the two, and that comes up very strongly in Steppenwolf and in Narcissus and Goldman. And you see an awful lot of young characters going through this stuff, and they meet people they look up to, and they have incredible relationships with them. One of the best ones is Demian, which is an amazing book, which I do urge you to get that if you can. I'm not sure if this one's in print at the moment, but that's a fantastic book. And his characters go back and forth between those two things, like in Narcissus and Goldman, which is a fantastic one. They do that. And as you see, these are very romantic covers, mostly by Caspar Friedrich, whose work is kind of like, if you think of Wind of Change on Hall of the Mountain Grill, I mean, that really sums it up. It's that sort of heavy European romanticism that's there. And Steppenwolf is probably the key book, really. After that, Hesse wrote all sorts of things. The culmination of his work was this book, The Glass Bead Game, aka Magister Ludi. And Hesse won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 60s. And this was a book which was read by an awful lot of people in the 60s. And it was one of the things that people in the sort of hippie era, particularly in California and in London, would have read. It was really, really important book. And the rock band Steppenwolf, who you'll know, who of course did the classic Born to be Wild, things like Magic Carpet Ride, great band Steppenwolf, they got their name from the book. And of course, there is a film of Steppenwolf, which isn't wholly successful. It has Max von Sydow, who plays the Exorcist in The Exorcist, who's really great. You can get it on Blu-ray. Read the book first, pick it up. It's interesting, it doesn't quite get there. It's a very difficult sort of thing to film. I think the best adaptation of Steppenwolf is Calvert's song, really. You know, you can't really fault it. So, you know, you'll know it and love it from Astounding Sounds, you know, and it's... and it fits into the album, and it's the centerpiece, really. But at the same time, it's an oddity because, of course, a lot of the sort of imagery is science fiction imagery. This is a nice yellow vinyl one. I imagine some of you guys have got that one. I just love this album. I could never have too many copies of it. But of course, it's Calvert's sort of first album appearance full of where he dominates as a singer, with the exception of K Do Flyer, sung by Nick Turner, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, it's a science fiction imagery packaging it. But when you look at it, there aren't really any science fiction songs. You know, the songs are different. They're about Reefer Madness, obviously, we know about that. There's songs about the urban, like Curb Crawler. K Do Flyer is so different. So it's a real sort of mixture of a record, and it does show all the creativity of the different people in the band. I know Dave Brock wasn't keen on that, and we do miss the fact that Dave doesn't take a lead vocal for the first time on this record, because he'd been so predominant on the others. But one of the great things I think about Hawkwind for me in the 70s is that they didn't have a lead singer. Different people sang. Okay, when Calvert was after Turner went, he sang pretty much everything, but you know, they always had different singers, and that for me was what made them fantastic. One of the things that made them fantastic, and great musicians, of course, as well. So Steppenwolf, that's pretty much it. It's based on that great novel, which you should read, and it's an interesting take on that. And I think lyrically, I could talk about it all day. I'm not going to, because you'll have your own ideas and you'll go back and listen to it. But if you've never read the Herman Hesse book, do, because it'll give you an insight into what it's about. Let's say the film's okay, but the book is really the thing. Just to talk a little bit more about Astounding, because it is hard to talk about it because it's mostly instrumental. I want to talk about Curb Crawler. This was the record store day reissue from a while ago. I don't have an original, sadly, and I really love Curb Crawler. I think it's really, you know, for you know, your basic rock and roll song that's about cars, you know, you can't really go wrong. The lyrics are really good. And I'm going to talk to you about something tangential, which is that whenever I listen to Curb Crawler, the timbre of Bob's voice and some of the lyrics, particularly in the little interval part where he talks about the insects in the skyscraper shade, the night city mantis and the neon parade. It's interesting because this is 1976, and the imagery of that is very similar to some of the imagery on the first album by Ultravox. Now, I'm not talking about mid-Ewer, I'm talking about the John Fox-led Ultravox, the Ultravox with the exclamation mark. Because Ultravox, they were one of those bands that I always think of as being the bands that time forgot. They came between glam and punk in the mid-70s, when we're told that everything's crap, and of course it wasn't. There was some great music, 74, 75, 76. I really love that period. There's some fantastic records then. And if you listen to a song like Saturday Night in the City of the Dead by Ultravox, and listen to the lyrics that John Fox was writing right the way through that record, they're quite similar to Calvert's. They're very literary. They've got all this sort of imagery of the city. The music's different because it's more sort of stripped down. It's not quite punk. It's before punk rock. It's got a sort of tincture of sort of Roxy music and glam, because some of it is produced by Brian Eno, who of course worked with Calvert on Lucky Leaf and the Longships, and of course he's on the Captain Lockheed as well. So have a listen to some of his lyrics, John Foxx's lyrics on the first Ultravox album, which is just called Ultravox. It's a great, great record. And sort of compare and contrast with some of the sort of more urban lyrics that Calvert did on this, on Steppenwolf, on things like PXR5. That focus that he had on the city, which Michael Moorcock talks about. So do have a listen to that. And Curb Crawler, to me, is very, very much in that vein, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a great song, you know, again, superb literate lyrics. So that's my feelings on Steppenwolf. I think it goes very deep into the heart of the European soul, and it shows how Hawkwind connect widely to culture in such a big way, and that for me is what makes them one of the great bands. I mean, a lot of critics used to laugh at them back in the 70s and say things about, you know, their music was blues based, it would go on and on and on, and finally we had somebody who came along and, you know, did a really great book. Thanks again, Joe, for that. If you haven't read this, I know I said this before, but I really can't say enough good about this, and I think it's fantastic. It's the book I'd like to have written myself and didn't get around to, but there you go, I was doing other things. So, you know, do have a think about reading Steppenwolf. I'm just going to show you this. This is the sort of 90s box set version. Now, I'll be honest, I saw this in Cardiff in Virgin in the early 90s, and I didn't buy it. And I think I actually bought the boxes. So a guy had them on eBay, and he had them flat. You could just buy the boxes, because inside my copy, there's supposed to be a book. There's rather good, that, isn't it? There's supposed to be a copy of Time of the Hawklords, which I already had anyway. So, and I first read Time of the Hawklords from the public library in Pontypridd that I come from in the early 80s. Inside is my copy of This is Hawkwind, Do Not Panic, which has been with me since a wonderful sunny day in 1984, when I'd been up for 36 hours. I'd finished my work in the factory where I worked, and it was the summer break, and I went and had a few drinks with the guys. I went for Chinese. I went to the cinema in Cardiff with a friend and a couple of girls, and then we went to a party, and we got up to all sorts of things, which I'm not going to go into detail in case my mum is watching. And I got home the next day. I'd been awake for 36 hours, and my copy of Chris Tate's book was there, and 3 Hawkwind t-shirts, which kind of made the day, really. But I went to bed. You know, I had to get to bed. And I had about 4 hours sleep, and I got up and read Chris's book, and it was great. So, you know, it's hard to do that sort of thing when you're older, but I hope you're still getting up to that sort of shenanigans if you can. Anyway, this is Outlaw Bookseller. I think it's probably time to have a listen to Astounding now, because talking about it has really made me want to hear it again. And great record. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much. Please subscribe, and I'm signing out for now. And remember, shoals of dead fish float on the lakes, but Uncle Sam is on Mars. See you again.